Putting the words genetically engineered, genetically modified, or bioengineered on a label does not provide content information.
GMOs are stealth ingredients in cereals, snack foods, infant formula, pancake mix, and pet food. Will these stealth ingredients further fuel the cancer epidemic in America? We don't know. Will they produce life-threatening allergic reactions? We don't know. The majority of GMOs have been developed to withstand higher levels of pesticide spraying or to produce their own insecticides. Will these foods endanger more children's health than are already compromised? We don't know.
With regard to labeling, we are opposed to mandatory labeling of these products. We feel, as there are consumer benefits that are promoted other than the production benefits we have now, that those companies selling those products will want to clearly get that information to the public so that they can take advantage of that intended market. The market will drive that issue.
FDA's 92 policy for biotechnology foods and ingredients provides consumers with everything the activists have asked for, except the ability to sow confusion and mislead consumers with government blessing. Choice is provided. If a consumer wants to buy food not derived from enhanced crops, they can buy organic and also pay the higher cost. If they want accurate and reliable information on health and nutrition, that is mandated by law. If they want to know if their personal preferences in regard to genetic modification have been met, companies are free to meet those preferences, provided there is sufficient consumer demand.
The potential contamination of organic crops has created a nightmare for those of us trying to ensure the integrity of our organic ingredients. We are now having to consider the cost of testing all of our ingredients, which could potentially be contaminated at some point in the growing or manufacturing process.
And I really can't help but have this prompt the question to me that if the confidence is there in the safety of these products, why is there so much objection to labeling?
Well, what's happened in England is that there's been really a total collapse in the market for GM agriculture. People over there, once they realised they were being fed food that they didn't want to eat, and once they saw Monsanto's advertising campaign, which was trying to make them feel guilty about blocking developments that would feed the world, it's obviously patent rubbish, people got very angry, and they've decided they don't want to eat it.
Contamination in this experiment is not a possibility. It's not a probability. It is an inevitability. And it's my contention that what these companies are trying to do is to say, oh dear, look, there's contamination all over the country now. Oh no, it's got into rape, it's got into field mustard, it's got into maize, it's got into barley, it's got into just about everything. Too late, horse is bolted, what's the point of keeping the stable door shut any longer?
It may be contaminated.
Well, we did a study in Mexico, in a special area of Mexico. This is the center of diversification and domestication of corn, where corn was brought from the wild state into domestication and cultivation. And this area is recognized internationally as an area of diversity where we hold the diversity of genetic resources that we need to bring into our cultivated crops every year to confront problems like new pests, new diseases, drought, changing climate, and so on and so forth. We were very surprised to find it immediately. We actually were expecting to see just negative controls from samples of these land races, these criollo varieties in the highlands of Oaxaca, in the mountains of Oaxaca in Mexico, and to our surprise, we had very high levels of contamination already. As soon as I felt secure about our results, because we did not want to report something that was just spurious or wrong, I contacted the Mexican government, and what they did immediately, which is I think the responsible thing to do, was to set up an independent study to see whether we were right or wrong. And soon enough they showed that yes, we were right, and their results are compatible with ours to really the quantitative detail.
You know, it's not like an oil spill that you can put a boom around it. When we have genetic pollution, we cannot put a boom around it. There is no controlling it.
For many years we have been assured that these manipulations, that these transformations are under control, that genetic materials are going to stay where we put them in the agricultural field and not go anywhere. There was talk about buffer zones that would be placed around transgenic fields. thinking that pollen would not move out or beyond those buffer zones. And I think the first level of importance of this discovery is that, that we find that that control really doesn't exist. The sites that we looked into are at least hundreds of miles away from any transgenic field, and also they are distant from transgenic manipulations in time. We have the benefit of a moratorium that the Mexican government placed on planting of transgenic corn. So we know that at least legally, since 1998, there shouldn't have been any transgenic plants nearby.
Pollen can travel up to 4 kilometers. It knows no boundaries. And genetic modification is occurring on close to 100 million acres worldwide. It's going to be virtually impossible to keep a field from being contaminated in one way, shape, or form from genetic pollution.
There is this policy contradiction in Mexico between banning the planting of corn but allowing totally open access to the international market of corn, especially the U.S. So Mexico imports about 6 million tons of corn from the U.S. every year. And in those 6 million tons of corn, they know they are receiving about 30 to 40% transgenic corn that is not segregated and is not labeled. So there's no way to separate it. Supposedly, these two policies are compatible in the sense that the imported corn is only going to go for consumption and not for planting. But that, of course, is a red herring in a place like Mexico, where people have lived for thousands of years off corn in a very, very tight relationship. So most people in the countryside will plant what they eat and eat what they plant.
The agency's been refining its policy pertaining to drift with conventional pesticides. A significant amount of work on that in recent years. But genetic drift has not been included in that. We don't have a specific policy with regard to genetic drift.
There have been cases of farmers in whose fields were found growing crops containing genes that were owned by companies to whom those farmers had not paid a fee for the seeds to grow those crops, or the technology fee that they're required to use those crops. And what this meant was that the farmer had violated the intellectual property of some huge corporation. And it might have happened because wind blew pollen onto the field, from a neighbor's field onto a farmer's field. Nevertheless, at least in Canada, courts have found that those farmers have violated intellectual property and owe a fee to companies whose crops they never wanted in their field.
The biotech companies that create these products have no liability for them. And no biotech company has yet been capable of getting any kind of insurance policy for any of their products at all. So all of the agreements that they have when they sell these products to commercial farmers are placing all of the accountability for any detriment caused by them on the farmers. So say commercial farmer pollutes organic farmer, then the organic farmer has to put a lawsuit against the commercial farmer. It's just like two people without any money whatsoever, like trying to fight a legal battle.
A lot of these crops have been engineered with a bacteria called Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a naturally occurring soil bacterium which acts as an insecticide. The BT plant exudes this toxin from every cell throughout its entire life cycle. Scientists have seen residues in the soil up to a year after the crop has been removed.
This corn, which is called BT corn, kills monarch butterflies. And it's the pollen of this corn. Just the pollen contains enough of the toxin to knock out the larvae of the monarch butterfly.
What Dr. Losi at Cornell found in laboratory simulations is that the monarch butterfly in his first studies died at about a 50% mortality rate. Subsequent studies suggest maybe only 7% of butterflies will die. It's still an immense impact in an evolutionary sense, and a completely unanticipated one. Other non-target insects that would be affected are those that happen to ingest the pollen, which is toxic to any species that has a larval form that has an alkaline gut. And Losi's work stands out more because it's a pilot study that should have been done 15 years ago when this technology first emerged, than the fact that it showed a dramatic effect.
They're increasing these feeding studies. The first time round, they did quite a bit of feeding studies on the actual components, the products of the genes themselves. They didn't do quite as many, but they are now, of the feeding studies of the actual expression of these genes in the crop plants themselves.
We have seen the development of insects that are resistant to the Bt crops, and the development of herbicide-resistant weeds. So these technologies are dated. They're dated. They take a very long time to produce, but they are defeated by biological rules very quickly.
Now some of the crops being grown contain chemicals that are useful to manufacturing processes, or contain pharmaceuticals that we must not ingest.
One example that I think it is very interesting is the corn that is being produced reportedly by this company in San Diego that has spermaticidal properties. So it's corn that if you eat it as a man, you would become sterile.
And we worry even more because of what is commonly called the Starlink scandal, in which industry and the regulatory agencies were supposed to have kept a particular corn off the plates of people in the United States, and were not able to. Their systems of segregation, their systems of controlling what went to our food plate didn't work.
Greenpeace is here today because EPA wants to dump Starlink corn on us. We say, EPA, do not approve Starlink corn.
So Aventis Corporation produced Starlink corn, which is a genetically engineered corn. EPA approved it only for animal feed because of concerns of that Starlink could cause food allergies.
The Cry9C didn't look like any known allergen. The one thing it failed on was stability, because the notion, of course, is with these proteins is if they stay stable within a simulated gastric environment, which is what they did, these proteins can then potentially be carried through and into the bloodstream and institute an allergic response. The IgE immunoglobulins are produced in response to this. So the agency said, well, let's hold on a moment here. This looks like it's more stable than all of the other cry proteins. These are the cry proteins that were produced for the other companies that were introducing Bt proteins into crop plants. And they said, well, we really are concerned about this from a human health point of view. We've no proof. We have absolutely zero proof that it's an allergen, but it is more stable, and we have to be concerned about that. So in fact, they went ahead and gave a split approval. Now, of course, they've decided they're never going to do that. No company would ever want to do it again, because it's just too difficult to segregate it all the way through and to ensure that you have identity preservation all the way through. Because if you're looking at every field and every mill in the country, there is some probability that animal feed and human feed may get mixed up.
We have now found that Starlink has made its way into the human food supply. It's contaminated corn products throughout the U.S. 300 food products have been recalled so far. Aventis is facing up to $1 billion in costs related to the recent food recalls. Aventis has now petitioned EPA and said, we believe Starlink is safe, and we want you, Environmental Protection Agency, to allow Starlink in the food supply.
After the fact.
After the fact.
In the case of Starlink, we never were able to get to a safety finding around human food use, and so after quite a bit of review with that material out in the channels of trade and a lot of it being sort of held up in suspense until we resolved the issue, there was a question about whether we were going to retroactively approve that food use, and ultimately we didn't. We didn't issue that approval because we couldn't make that safety finding.
There are innumerable different cultures on the planet Earth. Many encompass a very small group, involving only a tribe or a series of villages. Such tiny culture groups dot the continent which the Earth people call Africa. On the other hand, the continent called Europe is largely covered by a huge civilized culture which is spread over many parts of the Earth.
Being able to change whole cultural practices in these countries is not a trivial problem. As Florence Wambugu said, the real advantage of biotechnology is it's packaged technology in a seed. You don't have to teach these people to introduce new cultural practices, because many individuals have tried this over years, since colonial times right up until the present day, and they've not succeeded in doing it. It's incredibly complex to teach people new cultural practices, whereas if you give them a seed, the technology is in the seed, so it's actually neutral, if you like, insofar as the actual scalability. It would be the same for a farmer in a poor country as to a very wealthy farmer in this country.
But it comes down to that we are saying that innovation and creativity is only going to take place in labs with men in white coats. All that innovation and technology that has existed in the fields passed from one generation to generation is being ignored.
An issue in many parts of the world is vitamin A deficiency. People try to get vitamin A in the form of supplements to remote rural populations and have failed to do so. The consequence is a disease called night blindness, which often degenerates into literal total blindness. We're working on a project in which you put in a gene that creates provitamin A, beta-carotene.
You probably have heard from many people the story of golden rice, and this, from a scientific point of view, was an incredible engineering feat for a scientist to be able to actually genetically modify a complete metabolic pathway. So he went back to a very basic precursor of vitamin A production. It's called journal diphosphate, and then he stitched on all of the other enzymatic steps needed to produce beta-carotene in rice. I mean, this is an incredible scientific feat.
The vitamin A rice was a simple trick that could have been done 20 years ago. In fact, it could have been done by conventional means to breed plants that would have a higher concentration of vitamin A, since there are neighboring varieties that already have high vitamin A contents.
From a human nutrition point of view, of course, the jury is still out as to how efficient that's going to be. They're still looking at issues of bioavailability. But it's an incredibly efficient way to deliver these nutrients, especially to countries where nutrition is a real problem.
There are plenty indigenous species in the squash families, for instance, that have extraordinarily high amounts of vitamin A, as do sweet potatoes and other often pigmented carotene-containing plants. To put the beta-carotene gene into a rice plant was really, I think, an artful sop in order to get more support to biotechnology, more than a cure for a nutritional problem in the public that would be consuming the rice.
Using biotech, there's several ways that this can be addressed in addition to just introducing beta-carotene. There's other work going on in producing high iron content rice. Again, iron deficiency, especially for women and children, is a major problem in developing countries.
Well, what those malnourished children and people who are not well, what they really need is a vaccine against a social disease called poverty. If only the health budgets and social safety net programs of whether United States or whether overseas, if only the governments were allowed to do their jobs by financial institutions such as the World Bank and IMF, we would not need rice with vitamin A. We would not need rice and other things with all the vaccines in it.
I think, though, insofar as the consumer is concerned, the real advantage is going to be in the area of quality traits, where they look at shelf life, taste, and very important nutritional aspects, both at the macro level, at the protein and carbohydrate and fat level, where you're looking at better ways to introduce a more balanced amino acid ratio into your diet, which is something of course vegetarians have to look at all the time. Using biotechnology, you can do this for many different crop varieties, so that, for example, you can have high lysine corn, because the cereals are often low in lysine, or on the other side you can have sulfur-rich proteins introduced into the legumes because they're low in sulfur-rich proteins. At the micro level, there's incredible capability of improving the quality of vitamins and minerals, especially antioxidants, as we become more aware of the fact that we need to eat healthy food to stay healthy rather than always running to the doctor for cures, although biotech has the answer to that as well. But it's much cheaper and much more effective to eat healthy in the first place rather than trying to cure the ills of ill